you might not reach your goals, but you definitely won't reach them if you don't try.
Hi everyone, I'm LoCascio and welcome to another episode of Over the Wall. I'm here with Scott Kelly, an astronaut and one of the most amazing people when it comes to, when you think about it as a kid, you always want to be an astronaut, get to space, and he did it many times and was in the International Space Station for over a year and just has been an amazing person. But if you look at his journey in life, it's not from one place to astronaut. It was really a windy road. And I really wanted to talk to Scott and get his perspective on, how did he get to the world and get to his purpose in life. So Scott, welcome to the show.
Thank you, Rob. It's great to be here with you.
My first question is perspective. You've probably been asked this before, but very few of us get an opportunity to be outside of Earth. And I wonder the first time you went up and looked back at Earth, and how did it change you from as a human? How did your mind change on how you view this thing in which we sit on called Earth or humanity?
So it wasn't instant, but certainly the awe of looking at planet Earth from space is pretty. It's just an incredible feeling. The first time you see our Earth, from outside the atmosphere, you have this sense of awe about how beautiful it is. Also, how scary it looks at times. The atmosphere looks very fragile, but really the most beautiful sight you've ever seen. The most brilliant blue, really, the colors of it is almost like someone took the most brilliant blue paint and just painted it on a mirror right in front of your eyes. But I think the idea of gaining some kind of insight or perspective on the planet kind of comes over time. The more time you have to consider and think about it. My first flight was eight days in space. So mostly what we were thinking about was fixing the Hubble Space Telescope. Really,
that was Columbia, right? That was on the shuttle, on the space shuttle? Not Columbia.
We flew on Space Shuttle Discovery.
Discovery, yeah.
But yeah. Usually Columbia would go to the Hubble because it wasn't configured to dock with the space station. And, but it really, that kind of orbital perspective really requires that you've been in space for a while and have time to consider it. But you do think about, we're all part of humanity. The planet is not as big as we think. We're all interconnected. You don't see political borders from space. So these kind of sentiments, I guess, get embedded in your mind the longer you've spent in space.
That's interesting. So, like, when you think about what's your perspective? Because we're sitting on the rock, on the planet, and we do create these borders. I mean, seeing it from that perspective, you're like, there is no borders. It just looks like this one thing, and obviously you can't see people on it. But what do you think happens?
Well, you don't see, like I said, you don't see political borders. You can at night if you want to. I mean, you can imagine like where countries are based on their, the type of light bulbs they use. Often, especially like street lights. Countries use different lights with different chemical properties, I guess, and they look different. So at night you can see political borders, but during the day you can't. And then also on the space station, you don't see political borders either because it's this international program, international partnership where you have, U.S. and Russian and,
Japanese,
other European, Japan, Canada countries. And, you get the sense that you can do really incredible things if you work together, regardless of where you're from.
So why do you think, it's interesting, I'm just curious, once again, your perspective, then why do you think if it works up there and you can see the collaboration makes it work in the space station, it's just, how did it get all kind of cut up down? Everything's kind of separated. We're constantly in competition with each other, and I'm curious, where do you think it came from?
Yeah, I don't know. Maybe that's like human nature. Maybe it's genetic or something. I hope it's not, but to try to one person or one group elevating themselves at the expense of others. I don't know. It seems to me that if you work together, you can accomplish more. But sometimes that doesn't seem to be the case like between countries and
Yeah.
people, for that matter.
And do you think in especially in, I guess, the space programs, is there a competition now? I mean, I've been looking at what's going on with SpaceX and all that, but is there collaboration happening better than we're seeing, like, or is it really a competition going on with who's going to win the space race to Mars or
Well,
colonize?
with like companies like SpaceX, particularly SpaceX is really an incredible collaboration with NASA. Um, them, building a rocket and launching astronauts to the space station as they've done twice now, and cargo for years is not, just them. It's not an accident. That's by design. NASA paid and gave them a little bit of, guidance in what they wanted the requirements to be, and it's been incredibly successful, which is great. As far as countries are concerned, yeah, certainly, I think there's probably some competition with China, particularly, and that will probably increase. Sometimes competition is good. I mean,
Yeah,
probably without it, we probably wouldn't have never, walked on the moon when we did. We may have gotten there eventually, but certainly not, 10 years after President Kennedy proclaimed that we would, um, or nearly 10 years. So yeah, sometimes there is competition is good. I would prefer, though, that we did things in space collaboratively.
yeah. You would think if
Yeah.
it's like we have a chance to redefine how we work versus like it's
Yeah.
like looking here on Earth how we compete,
Mhm.
especially if we want to get to Mars and we want to get to other planets. It would seem like it'd be a better effort if we all combined our efforts. It'd be easier to
Oh,
do.
absolutely. It's going to when I was on the space station, a reporter asked me, "Hey, now that NASA found water on Mars, will it help us get there any sooner or quicker?" And I was like, "I don't know, maybe. But if we found money on Mars, then we get there really fast because that's what it takes is money. And when you
Exactly.
have other countries to contribute, it like eases the burden."
Do you think, I mean, just sticking on the Mars topic, I mean, what's your sense about us inhabiting that, being an astronaut? You think in my lifetime, in your lifetime, will we see someone living up there?
Uh, Maybe, we might see people there for short periods. I would not be a proponent of, the idea of sending people on a one-way mission to Mars to live there forever. Having lived in a enclosed environment for a long time, I would not um, be willing to do that myself for the rest of my life. So I do think it's in our future, but also I don't think Mars is a lifeboat for planet Earth. I mean, the
Right.
idea that we could destroy this planet and then just move to another one that barely has an atmosphere or any kind of resources that are easily used is to me science fiction, even though I've all the greatest respect in the world for Elon Musk and people like him that have these grand ideas about like terraforming Mars someday. I don't think we should consider that our lifeboat to just jump off Earth. It'll always be easier to live here regardless of how much we damage the planet than it will be on Mars. But I do believe we should go. I think there's a lot to learn, a lot of reasons why we need to do that, but not as an alternative to Earth. It's not a planet B, as they say, in my opinion.
Yeah. Because that's the sense I got, like Jeff Bezos and Elon Musk. It's almost like, well, when this whole place gets pretty bad, I'll scoop myself up there and we'll colonize, and I'll have
Yeah,
this other life. Why the Earth disappears, and
yeah.
it seems a little crazy that this beautiful thing we live on, we could destroy it to a point where we're going to go to a place that doesn't look inhabitable and make it habitable.
I think people that have that experience generally, not everyone, I can't like speak for everyone, but my understanding is that most people feel more strongly about the environment and protecting Earth when they have that perspective of seeing it from space. It's like I said, it's incredibly beautiful, but the atmosphere isn't. incredibly fragile looking. I mean, it's almost like a contact lens over an eye. When you're in an airplane, flying at, I don't know, like 38,000 feet, most of the atmosphere is below you. And
Right.
I don't think people realize that. They look up at the sky and it looks like infinitely large. It
Yeah.
is not. It is infinitely small in relation to the planet. So it's kind of almost scary to look at. And then, you see the planet, some parts almost always covered in pollution, like in Asia, Central America. If you're interested in this kind of stuff, you also know that the United States is the second largest polluter in the world. It's just not the kind that you can easily see. So if you can just
Right.
imagine, you know, the the country that is the second largest polluter, you don't even see any of those kind of pollutants because they're not coming out of like firewood for
Fine.
people
Right.
or coal plants. You get a sense that we're polluting on a massive scale. Rainforests in South America look different from when I flew in 1999
Really?
to
You can see it. You can
noticeably.
visibly see it.
Yeah, you can see how there's more cleared and burning fields, and you just in your mind you project that 100 years in the future and there's no rainforest,
Yeah. Yeah.
which is a problem.
Which is a major, yeah, that's hence go back to why we need to get, everybody's thinking
Yeah,
about getting off. It's like, it's
yeah.
crazy thinking, but, I want to turn back to your upbringing. I read, about your dad and your mom who are police officers.
Hmm.
And, it seemed like, I want to ask you, like, how did, your childhood sort of prepare you for, the extreme challenges of going after being an astronaut? We talked a lot here with other entrepreneurs and people like yourself, and there's one theme we kind of see is like no one seemed to have a really easy childhood.
Yeah.
And so reading just a little bit in the book, maybe you could talk about like what was it like and how did you think it prepared you and stuff like that?
Well, my parents were, both provided good and bad examples. The good was, my mother became a cop when I was a teenager. She had this goal that she thought she might not be able to achieve, but had a plan to get there, worked really, really hard, and was successful. My parents also let my brother and I know that, even though they weren't these like, hovering, do your homework kind of parents, that we had potential if we wanted to take advantage of it. Nothing was outside of the kind of the realm of possibilities of what we could achieve. But then they were also very hands off at the same time. So hey, you can do this if you want, go do it, or go work in the grocery store. It's kind of up to you. And so I always had that sense. They also didn't get along very well, and there was a lot of conflict in our house growing up, and so I think it also made my brother and I be able to deal with like tense, stressful situations at a very young age, and kind of we grew up in that environment. So I think when it came to like being in the military, flying airplanes, being an astronaut at NASA, it just kind of helped us dealing with things that are challenging, personal relationship experiences, which can help when you're doing something that is as extraordinary as launching on a rocket. So, they were both good and bad. You know, I would say though, my mom really stands out more in the good category.
Than your dad. Were you close to
Yeah,
your
than my
dad?
dad.
Were you
Yeah,
close to him
close.
or?
Yeah, close, but he had his warts.
So I'm curious, when you prepare, mentally to go to space, we talk about the mental game. Obviously, there's a component of being alone. I was reading the books, like you're with people, but you're alone. But what do you do? What have you done to prepare mentally to do it? What do you have to do?
I didn't do anything. No.
Nothing.
Well, part of my preparation for being in space for a year was actually flying in space for 6 months and understanding that 6 months is a really hard, long time and challenging. So I did give like my year-long flight some thought, I would say. And, it had to do with like pacing myself and, keeping things in the proper perspective. Interestingly enough, though, NASA is an organization that, is really good at preparing for, the next worst failure, and, having a plan and a backup plan and a backup plan. So they don't really leave mental health to chance. So, they screen us appropriately, but then before a long mission, you meet have regular counseling with the psychiatrists, the psychologists, that transfers to when you're in space. So like every 2 weeks, I would talk to, these four guys, like two psychologists, two psychiatrists on a video chat like this. And I would call them the brain trust. And, it was not optional. And, it's weird that we consider our physical health. It's like something that people have no problem, calling the doctor for. But if it's a mental thing, which is the most complicated part of our physiology, right? Our
Yeah.
brain. But if it's a mental thing, people have an issue with saying, I need some help. They should just do what NASA does. It's just mandatory. Just, everyone check in every couple of weeks with somebody.
So what do
Make
they
sure
ask
you're
you? I
okay.
mean, what are they doing with you? What are these four people doing?
They would
with you?
say, so, how you doing? How you sleeping? You getting along with your crewmates? You getting along with your family? Any conflict, stress, anything bothering you? And, at first I was like, oh, this is such a pain, telling them the same story week after week. But towards the end, I after talking to these guys every 2 weeks for a year, I kind of, towards the end, got to enjoy it. A little break. And I would actually mess with them too. Like we'd have a conference like this. And towards the end, I'd do stuff like this. I go, you guys see that? And they'd be like, what? You didn't see that? And they'd think I was like having hallucinations or something.
So I'm curious so mentally they're preparing you more or less. You're talking things through, you're preparing. And then obviously when you're up there for such a long period of time, and I know you were able to video your family and your wife and kids, but it seems like, I don't know what it's the mental game of being alone. Let's get there's other people.
I wasn't alone. Never alone.
That's right. There's other people there, but I would have to have a sense. Sometimes you feel you're not with your family. You're kind of in a work environment, like a small work environment all day, and it gotta be it's a little tough. No.
Yeah, when you go to sleep, you're at work. You wake up, you're still at work. You're going to be at work tomorrow and next week and next month and next year. When I first got up there. So it's, you got to change your perspective, kind of like in this pandemic, right? Like a lot of people that had were fortunate enough to be able to work from home is great because you can still have your job. But the downside of that is you're always at work. So you have to really, I think, be very mindful of how you handle that and prepare for it. Like for me, I absolutely make certain that my weekends are different than the weekdays because, not knowing what the end point of something is, you can't have it in your mind that I'm waiting. Like, when I flew in space, I knew I was coming home in March, launched in March, coming back in March, but it was so far away that I couldn't see the end of it from the beginning that I might as well have been up there forever, at least in the beginning. And that was my perspective. So I always needed something immediate to kind of look forward to. And I, in this pandemic and, living in this kind of quarantine environment, I find that it's so important for me to have the weekends completely different than the weekdays. So there's something immediate to look forward to.
Did you, when you were up there and obviously you created a structure with the weekends and everything, was there any surprises? Like, especially the first time you went out, maybe not to the space station, but even for the first time you went up, did you ever encounter some surprise that you didn't expect when you're up there, even though they train you and you're ready to go? What was there anything?
It's all a surprise. Like when the solid rocket motor's light and you feel 7.5 million pounds of thrust instantly. Like there's no acceleration. It's like instant acceleration. You realize, hey, this thing weighs 5 million pounds. And you just felt this like someone hitting you in the back with a 7 million pound truck. You get this feeling you're going somewhere. You're not sure where you're going. You're not coming back to Florida anytime soon. My twin brother, Mark, is also
Yeah.
an astronaut,
Yeah, of course.
and I flew in space a few years before him, and he had all the same background experience as me. He was my classmate, my astronaut classmate. So for a couple of years, I tried to explain to him what like the first 8.5 minutes of his space flight was going to be like, and I completely failed because when he landed and they opened the hatch, I was standing right there in the the little bus that
Yeah.
the astronauts come into, like right outside the hatch. He crawls out, and the first thing he said to me was, "I had no idea what that launch was going to be like." Like, despite me trying to explain it to him, he had no idea. I mean, it's just, and then it's like one thing after another in space. You just, we evolved to live in gravity, and we did not evolve to launch off the planet in this,
Yeah.
impossibly complicated vehicle, the space shuttle, and then live up there. So everything's a surprise. How the Earth looks, how hard it is to do most things in microgravity. How complicated the vehicles and the systems are, how much just training and effort it takes to live there. So it's one surprise after another.
But yeah, I assume, like, I would think there's times where I've done things like bungee jumped or a roller coaster, and there's that second that you go off the cliff and you're like, you have that fear. You go off
Yeah.
the cliff and you're like, I please just don't let me die. Then you realize you're alive and you're like, okay, I made it. I assume in that first 8 minutes, do you have your eyes closed, like praying
Yeah.
hard that
Well,
are you
I've
like, what happens there mentally?
Well, I've bungee jumped myself, and I'll tell you what, that step that you take is really, a leap of faith where you're just counting on that rubber band not to break.
Yeah.
And but it's like an instant decision you make. Launching into space is kind of like a process. You become an astronaut, you get assigned to a mission a year before, or 2 years. So you have time building up to it. So there's never that moment where you're pushing the launch button and you have the decision to not push it. Unlike with bungee jumping, you
Right.
just jump, right?
Right.
But it's a process that you go through in your mind that, okay, this is risky. Rockets blow up or crash. Three of my astronaut classmates were killed on Columbia. Four other, colleagues and friends with them. So you realize that bad things happen, but it's not this like instantaneous decision that you make. It goes over a period of time to once you're in the rocket, you've kind of put this idea behind you that, this could be the last thing I ever do, but, it's important. I feel that, we've taken the right amount of, safety measures to make it as safe as possible. And you just, hope for the best, plan for the worst kind of thing.
But it's interesting. Your brother, I mean, your twin brother, and you are the same profession. It's pretty.
Yeah.
I mean,
No
and so
longer
we,
though, right?
right. He went to government, right? Kept in
Yeah.
government. So I just, we talk about people working together. We had Lisa Bilou and her husband Tom, and they created this company called Quest. It's a big nutrition company, and they work together. And we talk about a relationship of like working with your family members, and obviously, in this case, their husband, wife, your brothers. But I'm curious to know, what was it like? And you, interesting enough, your beginning was kind of like mine. I had very bad SAT scores. I had a 980. I had to, and I think you wrote in the book your SAT scores. You didn't write what the score was, but
Yeah.
it's not like it wasn't that good. And you went to
Probably around I think it was around a 980.
Okay. I wanted to be a biomedical engineer. I
Don't tell
wanted to be
my kids that.
I was going to say, then you went to the University of Maryland, and
Yeah,
I read the story, and then you made it. And your brother took another way, but you ended up joining forces.
Yeah.
So how did it work, and who's better, by the way? Which one of you guys is smarter?
Interestingly enough, a few years ago, I said to my brother, I was like, hey, how did you all of a sudden like start getting like straight A's in high school? What the hell happened? You get hit by lightning or something? Yeah. And he goes, no, he goes, you don't remember like our dad sitting us down like between like middle school and high school, and saying how, we were both bad students, and he was going to start thinking about like vocational schools for us and vocational careers. And my brother's like, yeah, that's what happened to him. He's like, he didn't want to be a welder, or not that there's anything wrong with being a welder, but, or something like that. He wanted to go to college. So that like motivated him. Me, on the other hand, had absolutely no recollection whatsoever of this conversation, probably only because there was like a squirrel running outside the window. Had it not been for that squirrel, I probably would have went to Harvard or Yale or something. But that squirrel like caused me to get a 980 like you.
Yeah, it was like
But it's interesting that we wind up in the same job.
And it seems like, yeah, and I read that you read the book, The Right Stuff, and that kind of put you, you're like so amazed by it. You're like, I gotta take that way. And he took like, once again, a different thing. But I guess, did you ever guys did you feel like you're collaborating, working together, helping each other? It's like a partner in business. By the way, 2 astronauts in one family. Like obviously it's like 2 brain surgeons in one family. Like everybody talks to their kids either be an astronaut. But it's but it's pretty amazing to have 2 twin brothers become astronauts. Did you guys help each other through the process, or how did it really work?
There's really no competition, because I flew like first, I flew last, I flew in space 10 times as much time as he did. So, pretty soon he recognized that there's no competition here, and he just gave up and left and became a U.S. Senator. Yeah, of course. We try to help each other, support each other. We're competitive people, never really with each other though, which is odd actually. So, when he interviewed to be an astronaut, the first thing that came to my mind is when he got called to interview was like, holy cow, my twin brother might be an astronaut someday. Never in a million years did I think, holy cow, I might be an astronaut someday. I was just like happy for him. And then I got like called to be interviewed a couple months later, and and then things worked out for the both of us. And then throughout our careers, we just would always try to help each other, support each other, but never really that competitive.
But do you feel like it's a calling, or is it a career?
There are so many people that are have maybe more skills or ability than I might have had that could do this job maybe better. I don't know. But I think most people realize you're just, there's luck involved, right? But luck is being like prepared at the moment that you have the opportunity. But still, so many people could have done this job, and you just feel like it's a privilege. But it is, it does become your life. I mean, I was at NASA for 20 years. When I think of my, life's work, I will only think of that. I won't think of the times, even though I really loved being in the Navy and a fighter pilot in the Navy for 9 years, and then NASA for 20. I will always think of my experience and colleagues at NASA first as my, my greatest, contribution, I guess, to, society or whatever.
Obviously it's a major contribution what you're doing. Obviously, that's above what many people do in their lifetime or 10 lifetimes. But we often talk about here, like you have to be pretty selfish because you're focused, and it's a lot of work. Even building a company, I didn't get married until 5 years ago at 47, because I knew building a company was a selfish act. Like I didn't want.
Wasn't your SAT scores that caused you not to get your 980?
My 980, yes. So I realized I had to work hard. When you're not smart enough, you're like, I just got to work longer than anyone else.
Yeah.
Like work more hours in a day. I feel like I can make it if I just, and I've outlived everyone. It's one of the things I tell people. I say, like, you just need to I've outlived my competitors. I outlived I just got to be around long enough to succeed. But I think we've said it can be a selfish act. It's hard on families. It's hard on relationships. And an astronaut seems like a whole different level of focus. And so, I mean, what's it been like, in your life?
Well, there's certainly the astronauts that like remember their first memory of Neil Armstrong, uh, taking that first step on the moon, Neil and Buzz going to the moon,
Yeah.
and they like had this revelation that they were going to do that, and they like got straight A's from then on, and were an Eagle Scout and was the
Yeah.
best at everything. There are those guys. They do exist. I'm not one of them. I'm the guy that was like, flying in space. I'm like, how'd they let me in here? But I think that's a good trait, to be the person that always thinks, hey, I really shouldn't be here. I kind of like snuck in, because then you're like, I think it motivates you to work harder and be more thoughtful about what you're doing, to appreciate really the opportunity as well. I mean, appreciate what you have. I think when you think you're like entitled to this, or this was like your birthright to do incredible things, I don't think I don't think you might not value it as much. So I always felt like, I was the guy that, really didn't think I should be here. So let me make sure I just work harder than everyone else.
But do you think does it take a toll on the personal life, or is it hard, or what do you think?
Oh, of course. Yeah. Yeah. Definitely, without a doubt, your relationships, family relationships, kids. I mean, when you're, that is your focus. Maybe some people balance it well, but I probably didn't, you know, uh, as a result, failed marriage, those kind of things. But, that happens in all kinds of fields.
Do you have advice for anybody? Because I have it's a good advice thing. Like, if you're on your journey, you have this purpose in life, you're committed to something big, you got to work hard at it. Like, is there any advice there you would give? Because it's behind you. You've got this whole history of life.
Yeah.
Is there any advice there?
I would say consider, the impacts of what you're doing. Certainly you don't want to go into things, blindly. Understand that there are, some people are able to manage, a balanced life better than others. And I was reading an article about Tom Brady recently, and there was a bumpy point in his relationship where like football, like kind of was so much more important than his family, but he was able to figure it out and still win the Super Bowl. So I think it's possible to do both. Understand that it is possible, but it's something you have to consider and plan for.
Because in the book you write about your daughter Samantha a couple of times, and I was trying to follow through. Like, it seemed like I wasn't sure if there seemed like there was some challenge there. You wanted something more from her. Maybe I'm reading into but you wrote about it, and I couldn't get to the end. I couldn't figure out in the end what happened. Like, did it all get resolved, or because it's, once again, you're an astronaut. Like, it's hard to be a daughter of an astronaut, I would think. Yeah. And so I'm wondering what happened there.
I'm picking her up at the airport, like when I get off this with you, like in 15 minutes after I got to go to the airport. So, and pick her up. She's coming to visit.
Oh, great.
Yeah. Relationships are challenging, and even with your kids, one of my worst moments of the space, and I don't know if she likes me talking about this, but it had to do with her.
Yeah, it's a tough thing to manage. Once again, if you're working and you have kids, and people want to have families, they have dreams, but it's hard. A lot of people get divorced when they build companies. Something happens, they get. Right. So I always think, like, how is there a way to get through it, and interact with your family? Because in the end, I always think, like, we're all going to be on our deathbed somewhere, and you assume you want your family, you want your kids to be there and think, God, I'm proud of my dad, and I was close to him. It's just I don't know if that's possible.
Definitely something to think of. When your parents are gone, it's definitely something you think about, like that relationship once it's over. What you would have done differently or better. So,
if you can give some advice, based on obviously your life as an astronaut, but what are some of the lessons, like, just life lessons for, once again, people going out there trying to do something with this purpose in life? And by the way, not everyone needs to be an astronaut or running a company. It's just you're following your dream, but following dreams is hard. We all know that. And so
Yeah.
what lessons would you give or insight would you give on following the dream?
Well, I would say that it's possible to have a dream and to realize it. I- it's not going to happen for everybody. Understand that, like I said earlier, there are many more qualified people than me that could have flown in space, but it just didn't work out for them. So, hope for the best, plan for the worst, find your inspiration, something that you feel passionate about. Understand that, um, you know, to be successful, you need to take risk. Um, Risk in yourself, risk in many different ways. Understand that failure is an option. There's that failure is not an option phrase that was used in the Apollo 13 movie.
Yeah,
Never said really during the mission, but that was more of a production thing. Failure is not an option. It's always an option, and you will fail. Now, hopefully, your failure doesn't result in you getting killed, depending on what kind of business you're in. Certainly, in my business, that was the worst outcome of failure. But understand that people, need to, like you said, you in your company, this was not your first
yeah,
venture, and you were not successful at first. So understand that, and that happens, and learn from your mistakes, and um, stay motivated, and hopefully you'll achieve success. You might not reach your goals, but you definitely won't reach them if you don't try.
that's right. And when you think about failure for yourself, once again, the show's Over the Wall, or the wall you faced. What are one or two walls or failures that you had to face to get over around? What was it?
My biggest was the fact that I absolutely could not pay attention growing up and in school, sitting in a classroom, trying to learn something. I basically spent 13 years, well, including kindergarten, 14 years, including my first year of college, just staring out the window. Hey, what's going on out there? Nothing going on in here that I'm interested in. So that was a huge wall for me. And what allowed me to get over it was reading Tom Wolfe's book, The Right Stuff, being able to relate to the people in that book that I knew were real people, but feeling like I had something in common with them, with only one exception. That's I was a bad student. I related in every other way to those original astronauts that Tom wrote about, with that one exception. I thought, well, if I could just somehow fix my studying problem, maybe I could go fly airplanes in the Navy. Maybe if not the Navy, maybe the Air Force. Maybe become a test pilot. Maybe quite possibly even an astronaut someday. And I know, like, people hear this story, like 18-year-old kid reads book, decides he or she's going to become an astronaut. That's a giant leap.
Yeah,
But really, in retrospect, it was a bunch of much more smaller, manageable steps. Kind of like, if you mentioned brain surgeons in the family earlier, you get a brain surgeon, you're like, that guy's a brain surgeon. You can't imagine that guy from high school being, tooling around in somebody's brain, right? But you could imagine that person as a surgery resident becoming a brain surgeon, or, a doctor becoming a surgeon, or a college student becoming a medical doctor. So, everything in life is a process. Small steps lead to
so what was
giant
that
leaps, which
small?
is
It's a really good thing, because when you read the book, it sounds like you read the right stuff, and then, like, wow,
yeah,
you started to focus. It's like, oh, and then I got
yeah,
serious about studying. But I love what you said about the small steps. It's a good
yeah.
piece of. But do you remember, like, what was that? Because one time you're looking out the window, now you're
Oh
like, I
yeah.
got to make. What was the first small step?
Well, the first step was, okay, I got to learn how to study and pay attention, and it was really like brute force method for a while that I started doing better. And then I get into a college. It wasn't like, this at the time, this like great school, but it was a good place for me. It was great for me. I had a military structure, and, very few distractions, and I could focus. It wasn't, incredibly hard, although I don't know, you know, I think kind of colleges are, none of them are harder than the other. They're harder to get into, but they're basically teaching the same stuff, right?
Yeah.
It's like
Yeah.
not like two different types of calculus.
Right. Exactly. Yeah.
They're probably all equally hard. But I'm there, and I remember calling my brother, and like I think it was like Columbus Day weekend or something. So it was in the beginning of the school year, and he was a year ahead of me at the U.S. Merchant Marine Academy. I say, hey, get this long weekend. Let's go down to Rutgers to our friend's frat house for some frat party. And he's like, no, I got some tests next week I need to study for over the weekend. And I'm like, oh, okay. And I was going to go myself. He goes, hey, you've been there like long enough. Haven't you had like a calculus test or something? Or do you have like a math test coming up? And I said, yeah, like on Thursday of next week, I'll study like in the beginning of the week. And he like started like cursing at me. Like, what are you crazy? Like, I'm not even going to say it on here because I don't know if this is PG or R-rated podcast. But he goes, you should be like staying home this weekend and doing like every problem and every chapter that is on this test until you know for a fact that you can do everything you're going to be tested on. And I actually thought about like blowing him off and, my twin brother and just saying,
Yeah.
whatever, I'm going to the party. But, I thought, maybe I'll listen to him. But I did what he said. And I took the test. I got 100. And I had never gotten like probably more than like a C ever on a math test. And then I knew like what it took for me to do well. So, sometimes I describe this as like if you're the student that's like trying to get a B on something, right? You got this scale of 100 and you're trying to hit this like 10-point target. That's a really small target. I mean, you're off by 11 points from a B and you're getting a D.
Right.
So for me, I had to make the target so much larger. So what I realized was I'm not going to try to get an A or a B. I'm not going to try to get 100 on something. I'm going to try to get a 200. So then if I fall short, I still have done well. So then after that, my philosophy was always like, it's kind of hard to hit these small targets. Let me make the target bigger. Let me know everything I have to know about something. So even if I, am not completely prepared, I'm still prepared enough. Yeah.
So that's brilliant. So basically set way, way big targets. So when you fall short, you're still getting an A. You're still at 100.
Yeah.
You're still going to make it.
Yeah, exactly. Like why limit yourself to this small target when you can make it so much bigger, and then even if you fall short, you're still.
So it must have been amazing. Like when you get the 100 on the test, I guess that just reinforced that was it. Like all the other things you read in the book outside of studying, but now you realize there's a path forward.
Yeah, I knew what it took at that moment. I said, okay, now I know what it takes for me to do well. And then I just kept doing that same thing over and over again. That always did well after that.
Which is kind of the life of an astronaut, I guess. You're preparing for every step, right? Like when I read about the Apollo missions, it sounded like before they did it, like they kept shooting up, getting closer to the moon, getting closer, coming back, learning. It's like you do every step over and over again, every step to get to your goal and do it as good as you can.
In that job, there are implications for not being prepared that, lead or can instantly lead to your demise. So, there are switches on the space shuttle, like during ascent, that if you throw the switch or push the button at the wrong time, the thing explodes. So you got to be really well prepared and certain about what you're doing. And, there's very little margin for error. So, yeah, that's something that is important.
So my last question, you put a book together of photographs from space and you talk about the beauty of all that. Yeah. And I guess I'd ask you, so many of us are here on Earth stuck in our day to day. And once again, that perspective, what would you say to us?
Well, certainly, like my experience with this pandemic is not normal in that, I can work from home. It's, even though there are impacts me professionally, personally, I know a lot of people have it so much worse, and I really do feel for them. But, what I would say, in the challenging things that I've done throughout my life, there's always at times you look back on them and think, over time, the experience doesn't seem as bad. And hopefully there'll be things that we benefited from with this experience. So I'm hopeful of that. Uh, the other thing I would say is we are incredibly, really intelligent, adaptable species, and we can get through this. It's not over. I really, really wish that everyone would just look at the science and the data and understand that getting a vaccine is so, so important.
Yes.
But for some reason, a lot of people aren't on board with that. I've been vaccinated. I had no issue with it. It's actually somewhat of a liberating feeling.
Same
Even
with
though
me.
you
Yeah.
still follow the guidance, that you feel like, well, at least I'm not going to get sick and die. But I would just say that we are incredibly capable to do amazing things if we just work together as a team, all of us.
Right. That was how we began, which is like if we all work together, like we're not competing all the time, but we're trying to work
Yeah,
together on probably. It seems like the big issues in the world we can only solve together. Whether it's
yeah,
climate change, it's not the United States doing one thing, and
yeah,
we just have to work as a team. Which you showed up in the space station. That's the only
yeah,
way you can be in a space station. Well, thank you for your time, and thank you for the service
yeah,
to our country and to humanity. I mean, it's something about space and someone who takes that risk and does it and then comes back and tells the stories. It just makes us understand like there's something greater than our day-to-day lives that we're all living. And
yeah.
it's amazing what you did, especially with your SAT scores. So we should try
Not
to
going
find
on the
everyone.
record.
I was going to say we should try to find everyone who had bad SAT scores and see where they are
Right?
in life. So, but thank
Yeah,
you for your
that'd be
time.
a great list. You could
Yeah,
produce a list.
Scott,
All
thank
right,
you, and be safe
all
during
right.
this time. Anyway, okay. Thank you very much.
Take it easy, Rob.
Take it easy
Thanks.
too. Thanks.
All right.